is like liquid phenolic resin, the stuff you put on fiberglass. And some plastics, in some clay, you can understand, certain clays that you can mold with over and over again, reshape it, and then put it in an oven and bake it, and then it becomes hard. There's clay that's set by heat. And if you had some clay here, and you had a single laser beam going through here, and you moved it across the clay, laser beam, it would set a strip of clay hard by baking it all the way through. However, does anybody doesn't understand that? The laser beam is hot, and it goes right through the clay and bakes it. Only you have a thin piece break that bakes. Then you peel off the rest of the clay, and you have a kind of a sheet of clay that's baked. Can you picture that? Anybody have any difficulty with that? The clay bakes at a certain temperature, it sets hard. There's certain liquid plastics here, if you had them in a container, this is a container filled with liquid plastic. If you ran a laser beam through that plastic and ran around like a circle, and then you poured the rest of it out, you have a circle of hardened plastic. The hardening comes from the heat of the laser beam, which is set a certain, it moves at a certain rate. Then you lift out a cylinder. I don't know how clean it is, but I guess it's clean. They use two laser beams, and both laser beams meet at a given point. They're aimed at a given point. And where they meet is the thermosetting temperature that sets the plastic hard, only where these two meet. By moving the two sources up and back, we talked about this a long time ago in sessions, so that the laser beam focuses here or there, you can set a hard line by turning them down. You get a line of solidified plastic. Now, if you know how to work those laser beams so they meet here, and then you vary this so they meet higher in here, you can shape it. Like if you knew how to do this, if you knew how to make, this is in a block of wax. Wax doesn't set. We'll take a block of clay. If you can move the laser beams so they focus only in that object, they come together at all points in there, and then you peel away the soft clay, you got a hard car model underneath it. You have difficulty with that? Anybody? All right, I'll try to make it clear another way. This represents a fishbowl full of water. Now, this doesn't happen. They don't do this. This is only an analogy. If you could design two laser beams, where they meet, they freeze the water. And if you could move them along, the triangular point like that, you'll have a shaft of frozen water in the water that's liquid. Is that clear? If you could generate refrigeration at the tip. Now, if you can move those laser beams so they freeze the water here and there and up and down, you can freeze a sheet in the water. It works in the opposite. It makes it solid. Just like this, converts this section of the water to ice. Now, if you wanted the bottom of the pond of water to become a block of ice, again, it works in reverse of this. Your laser beams meet on the bottom and they scan up and back like that. So this whole bottom becomes a block of ice. If you move your focal point up in the middle, you can shape your ice like that. See this general shape in the block? Even though there's water here. So long as the laser beams meet where they meet, now they move the focal point up and back. So you can freeze it by scanning and then move it together so you raise a freeze point up here and they can freeze a shape like that. Now if you took a guide tool and ran it over a human head like that, and the laser beam system worked like that, right off of this, like a key duplicator, you can make any shape you want to. This guy claims that by using a certain type of heat-setting plastic, let's say celastic material, like a rubber plastic, which can set up fairly hard, he can set up or freeze the liquid plastic in the shape of that, and then cut the rubber open here, like that, and take out the solid model and use that as mold. There's a negative set in there. If this is not quite liquid, but just about jello, he can open it up and use it as a mold. Now here's what it means. It means that all the nations that don't have master machinists, that don't have the technical ability to make such things, can get a computer. He didn't use this in his description, but this is what he implied. And the person learning how to operate that computer can type a delineation, if you know how to do that. Type a cube, and you get a cube made of plastic material. If you type an oblong or a rectangle or a hexagonal shape or polygon or anything else, you type it in and the laser beam moves in accordance with a pre-programmed computer. That would mean that if India set up a plan, they don't have the technicians, they get this someday from IBM or Honeywell, and they type up a shape, a configuration, and that cuts out the configuration. Here's what it also means. It means that if there were a central industry in the United States wired to all other industries that had a need for a model of a given shape, they can run it here and shape it in England by telephone lines. They'd be able to shape any object if you had the machine in your factory and she had the engineering calculator. She would type in the shape and it would cut a human head or anything else. Now, just how accurate they are and how well they look, I don't know. But it said it can shape anything in an XYZ plane. Now, if you don't understand it, I will describe it another way. And I'm sure there's a lot of you who don't understand it yet. And here is the way. If you don't understand this, I quit. This is a block of cheese. This is a tight wire held by a bow of steel. And if you move that bow through and up and down, you're going to cut that cheese in some special way like a bandsaw. You understand that? As you drive that wire down, up and back and forward, you're going to shape it. If you tilt the wire, you can shape it another way. The wire is a laser beam. It goes through and moves up and down. The double system, one laser beam, this is a beam of light, shape focused at this point. And if you want to harden down here, you have to open it up so that the focal point moves down here. And then you move the pair up and back while you change the focal length, like that, where you change the meeting point, and you can freeze any object. It means, he said, it may open up the possibilities of teleportation. Now, what he meant by that is you can make a duplicate shape by wireless anywhere in the world. By sending these signals to a duplicate set of lasers mounted in England, in the United States, they pre-programmed the electrical, send them over to one in England and says, it looked like this. And you'd open that gadget, you'd have a model of a house or a head or an arm or a hand, which means that people who cannot sculpt or do anything, all you have to do is hold your hand in front of a camera and rotate it so it gets photographs. And those photographs synchronize the laser beam to cut out this shape if you give it enough information. That would mean you'd be able to duplicate, if it's important to normal people, the presidents or models of buildings or anything else. Now, maybe it'd be easy to bring it down to a micro level, a macro level, and then down to the micro level and make duplicate shapes of super miniature parts. Sort of a pantograph, if you haven't seen it. Pantograph, you trace a small hole and it makes a large hole. All you have to do is set the pantograph adjustment of 3 times the size, and you can make that. That, as I understand it, he says, by using certain metals, by using certain ingredients in metals, or he meant metals with certain types of salts in them that can be crystallized at a given temperature. You might be able to later make gears, machine shop parts, and in production, if you had a multiple unit, you can make 500 gears as they all move over and shape it. Now, how fast can the laser move? If you wanted to shape it real fast, if the laser moved too fast, like that, it may not be a high enough temperature. By starting with a very high temperature laser beam and moving super fast with it, you can make 5,000 parts in 1 second, anywhere in the world, which would do away with a person called a master machinist. Now, what I would do, as I understand this product, if it is already developed, it's already developed according to the article, I would hire or start an international conference of master machinists and have them, and mathematicians, and have them program a gigantic technical computer into the geometric known shapes, all geometric forms and shapes. And all you would have to learn how to do is type out what you wanted in the geometrical shape and the scale, 1/2 inch to the foot, whatever you wanted. tenth of an inch to the foot, and you got a geometric object, which is really fantastic. In terms of man hours, it takes a lot of man hours and a lot of money to make machine parts or shapes. Now, if you take a thing shaped like this in aluminum, that's an aluminum sheet bent around to look like this, and I'm sure most of you here have seen something like this, with a little metal handle on it, like that. You push it down over a cookie or dough, and it shapes the dough like that. Four-leaf clover. You ever seen anything like that? Made of tin, pushed down over the... Okay. The laser beam is a hot line that travels like that, right through the plastic, and it cuts it out, blanks it out. And if it's a semi-liquid, it'll solidify it. Any questions about it? Anybody have any questions about that? I see it as super revolutionary. And when he meant teleportation, he meant he could duplicate a form in another country or in a submarine under the water from some transported, transcommunicated signals. That's what it means. And it is tremendous. It's a tremendous breakthrough. It's a tremendous breakthrough in many areas that he didn't even talk about, which will be seen immediately as it appears in technical journals. Here's what's going to happen to that. So I'm going to extrapolate or project the possible uses of that. If you have a plastic material with metal all over it, like this, you might be able to cut a printed circuit in 8,000 units all over the world on one signal, which is really quite interesting to me. That's what that means. It means many other things, and you have to sit down and think about the possibilities of it. Okay? Any questions about that? Did you want to discuss anything in particular tonight? Anybody have any particular areas? All right, then today I'm going to try to talk about a procedure which occurs automatically in the human brain that gives a person, that generates stress or a breakdown. I'll try to show you something of how that phenomena works, how a person slips off the deep end. And they do slip off the deep end through a process which you would ordinarily call logic. It's a logical process that drives a person off the deep end. It is because they are logical that they go off the deep end. And here's how it works, if I can get this point across here. Through the process of conditioning, you learn how to make an adjustment. Here's what that means. When you see a certain colored substance and you step in it and you sink, you avoid that substance. Now, I told you before, if somebody vomited on the floor and you were walking along, you would step over it, even if it was plastic vomit, because the imagery generates that anticipatory response of slush and odor and dirtiness, whatever the hell it is, you step over it. Human beings usually do not behave in accordance with the phenomena ahead of them. They generally have inappropriate behavior for unknown visual appearances. If you see a green ball glowing on a tree, and if you touch it, if the green ball has spots and it burns your fingers, you won't touch it again. So you look at anything else that looks green ballish with spots, whether it's oblong with spots, there's a intellectual propensity to stay away from patterns that have elicited bad responses. The degree to which you can distort that pattern and make the spots large and with a couple of yellow dots, that's called presence. When you stay away from something that's just a little tiny bit like the other thing and react as though it was the other thing. You see? Now that is a little bit connected with the sanity of innovation. In innovation, you take those...
Isn't that generalization to an inappropriate degree, possibly?
That's a hard thing to know what an appropriate degree is. And we can only judge that. Let me tell you what he's trying to say there. When a guy that looked like this kicked the shit out of me and bothered me, should I stay away from a guy that looked like that, with a little bit of that? Now, if I run away from a guy with a negative bit, instead of a positive bulge, if I run away from that, I may be carrying it to the extreme. The process of logic is to expand a system with an anticipatory concept of what the consequences might be. And that's what social innovators and product innovators do. In the behavioral sciences, you run into what they call the disorders, and there's a whole slew of them, and they work like this. I'm going to use you, Van, tonight to describe how the disorders might work. Let's say that Van, in particular, does something. It's very hot in here, and he turns off the fan. And when he turned off the fan, it was only that event that caused me to become violently angry at Van, and I bawled him out. And I recall in the same bawling out, not only about the fan, but the time he didn't give me my key for my car so I could get out of here before it rained. I will recall many other bad events along with that anger. Now, what happens is when Van looks toward the fan next, I am now uptight because I expect the Van turning off fan behavior. And the Van comes in and buttons his sweater together. It's pre-fan turning off behavior. You think you know what I mean by that? If he starts buttoning up his sweater, I would assume he's going to turn off the fan. If he comes in, just like that, I might assume he's going to turn off the fan. So the way we become mentally ill and hard to live with is by assuming that the next pattern of behavior you are going to manifest is going to annoy me. So I am a little annoyed before you manifest the behavior. And so I am inclined to fly off the handle because I assume unpleasant behavior. If that is carried out, if you live with a person for 10 years, and that person annoys you in the areas of A, B, C, and D, and let's say, and E, any behavior that approximates that, which everyone is going to go through, is going to generate the full annoyance without the behavior coming on. Shut your fucking mouth. Then I tell you not to do it. Right away, see? So what happens is we shortcut things. Instead of waiting for Van to turn off the fan, I become angry and uptight. Instead of waiting for little Dave to fart when I close all the windows and all that, he walks up back room and he goes like that, and I'm angry at him right away because of anticipatory behavior. And most of the mental illnesses are attempts to shunt the stress of the final event, that they blast off before the final event. And so what happens is they become so keyed up at those things that they blast off to avoid painful events. And they have unreasonable denunciations. Is there anyone who doesn't know what that means? I'll say it another way. They become unreasonably intolerant. Now that would occur in the prejudice areas of, like I said, living in a black community where you've been ripped off and beaten, hit on the head badly, and in the hospital for 3 weeks. You become very antagonistic to Negroes walking down the street with a dull light on. That anticipatory behavior could be useful, it may be truthful, and it may be totally erroneous. But you can't afford to say, look, not all Negroes are thieves. But if you walk on the other side of the street toward the light, you say, look, why take chances? See? So, but if you carry that to the extreme, you become difficult to live with because of anticipatory behavior. Now, there are people who preserve themselves from a nervous breakdown through anticipatory remarks. If they waited till Van turned on the fan, they would be so explosive. And so when they say, don't turn on that fan, you may think, my God, the person's intolerant. They are saving an actually explosive event that will occur. So when you find that people are intolerant, I may be completely intolerant of Rosalie, whereas I may not be intolerant of Carl, because he's never brought me to the brink of explosiveness by his behavior. You see what I mean? So I am psychopathic with Rosalie, but with Carl I'm not. And there are certain people that tremble when other people come into the room. They tremble when, if you're, let's say that John becomes a very good glass blower, and one day he decides, which I'm sure he won't do, to make the Eiffel Tower of glass. Very delicate structure of glass, thousands of hours. And he sees an iron worker come into the room with dirty hands and, hey, breathe it out. This guy starts shitting in his pants, but when the instructor of glass blowing comes into the room, he says it's a very fine piece of work. He anticipates that the guy will probably handle it with kid gloves, or not even handle it, but study it. You see what I mean? Now that anticipatory behavior is reasonable. Now when children come into the room, undisciplined children, John has a shit hemorrhage if he's in the bathroom taking a leak while the Eiffel Tower is there and he hears the voices of 7 non-disciplined children. Do you understand that? No. Now Dave loves children and he's not an Eiffel Tower maker. Therefore, he has no concern. He doesn't even think about would they damage the Eiffel Tower. The first thing John did was running around putting an armored plate around the Eiffel Tower. First thing that Dave says, oh, these wonderful children, they're studying art, music, chemistry. He doesn't see that relationship. And John doesn't understand how Dave thinks about things. And when the kids touch your Eiffel Tower and you get pounded glass underneath, see, Dave is surprised. You're not. Because you are very conscious. When I say that, I mean you're very much aware of some levels of probability in child behavior. And I'm trying to show you what stress is. Stress is related to your involvement in a thing or a system or a relationship. And an aspect of that relationship that causes you to become uptight, like Dave might be very conscious of mosquitoes. They may pick on Dave. Now when Fresco goes running into the shop, he's interested in trying something, and he leaves Dave's door wide open. And when Dave sees one mosquito, he now knows there's thousands of them in the room. And Fresco is thinking of getting this fucking part to see if he put that stainless steel part when he walks out the door, so he doesn't close it. And Dave, anticipating that, nails a sign on the door. Shut tight. Well, you can't miss that, because he can't allow for telling me, he tells me 5 times, by putting up the sign, he's dealing with a problem. But if Dave were a mechanist, he'd buy a spring that pulls the door shut after you open. I'll buy it when I get around it. It pulls the door shut. There are automatic shutting doors. And that's the way you save your nervous system. Now, another thing, Dave likes his room very clean. And Fresco likes to water the lawn out there. There's a lot of mud out there. And he wears shoes that pick up mud in here. See? Lots of mud. And when he comes into Dave's room, there's great deposits of mud. There's no way for me to answer that phone when it rings, because I've been working for 2 years on Channel 2. And if it rings, I got to come in there. I can't hose off the shoes all the time. He doesn't know that. So I get uptight if I don't run in and get the phone, and he gets uptight because his concern is the tracking of mud. You understand? Then when he sweeps up the room and he hears me coming from the shop, he can anticipate 1.5 foot of mud. I know of these things. I'm aware of these things, so to speak. But I can't afford to take on the disciplines of closing the door and handling all the other things. Yes.
How much anticipatory behavior is appropriate in people, and does it vary differently among different people? In other words, is it necessarily a helpful or hurtful thing in some
I really can't answer that. I suppose it depends on the circumstances. I know if I heard a whistling jack, I would dive in a hole first. I'm not about to say anything I might be wrong. I would dive in a hole first. And he says, boy, you're a hysterical son of a bitch. And thing was 9 miles off. Well, I'm not as discriminatory. He may be an expert on where a missile's going to fall. I'm not. I can only rely on my own ignorance and my limited information. So my decision-making system is based on my degree of appropriateness. And I wouldn't know that. Because every decision I make must seem right somehow. Because there's no monitor or instrument panel in front of my eyes that says, boy, you fucked up in that area. Because we don't have any instruments. Because we also don't know how to step. Some people think that if you walk over thin ice gently, you're less apt to break. If you weigh the same, if you weigh 150 pounds, thin ice can't be 150 pounds. It doesn't matter how gently you walk. However, if you come down like that, you're bound to go through because you're delivering more weight than your body weight by rising and falling on something. So I really can't say what appropriateness is. I can say this, that there are experts that know how soft snow is by looking at it. Not experts, but a lot of people around know the fluffy snow that you'll sink in with skis 1.5 foot and they'll know the kind of snow that you don't sink in that deep. I don't really know that difference. Does anybody know it here? You think you might know that? Does anybody know the appearance of thin ice? Okay. If you know that, your decision-making system is. Now, how come you get hysterical when you're taking my 3 kids out for a walk over the ice? You get hysterical at me taking my own kids over the ice about me walking on thin ice, and I don't get hysterical because I don't have the input in the associative system you have regarding thin ice. And I always look hysterical at you because my decision-making system is not yours. Now, another person says, have you ever heard this? Why are you that concerned about something? Because you're that involved in that something. See? You're that involved. Now, if I told Carl that the roof leaks in all these rooms, Carl doesn't give a shit because he doesn't have any books in these rooms. Dave has years of collections of paper. If it starts leaking, he becomes concerned. And he buys a polyethylene sheet and puts it over his books. That's an act of concern. See? So some of us are concerned about certain things, and other of us are not concerned at all for this reason, that we're not involved in it. So if I say, Dave, you hysterical son of a bitch, he's running in there covering his books with polyethylene, they're not my books, he's a hysterical son of a bitch. And if he hears a group of Negroes on bicycles come down the street throwing stones at things, anything around, and he just borrowed his friend's Mercedes car during a session, if he can hear that and look down the street and hear the stones, he goes running out. And I say, Van, why are you hysterical? Because he's not hysterical, he's acting as fast as he can to a problem that only he knows about. And so hysterical people, in some instances, try to cope with a problem instantaneously. Now, we would call him paranoid if he came up to Fresco's house with his car and then proceed to put up an armor plate all around his car so that the event wouldn't occur. You can do that? Now, that would be called the Army trial. The Army is just like that. The Army's got anti-missile missiles, and it's got radar, and it's got all that shit out there. And the more appropriations they get, they put spy in the sky, satellites, you know, and they hang a lot of shit out there, and no event is about to occur. The Russians are having a festival. There's nothing to do with an attack. But the Army's job is, God damn it, you know, you never know. Since Pearl Harbor, America is somewhat paranoid about its defense systems, and so are the Russians since the Nazi invasion. Are they paranoid? Are the Jews paranoid because they feel that the Arabs might come in on that area suddenly, and they got all kinds of little armaments here, and the Arabs say, well, they're not going to invade your land. You have nothing to worry about. They don't trust the Arabs on the basis of past history. You understand? So I'm not talking about who's right, who's wrong. We always look at the Jews running around and figure, my God, they must be paranoid. First of all, most of us here are not Jews, and we're not involved in that. Or we have no interest in Israel. And so we're not paranoid about it. But we are all paranoid about areas that we're involved in. We seem paranoid, perhaps, to other people. But I'm using that kind of terminology because I just want to say a better term would be overreaction. And overreaction is hard to decide. If I borrow your Mercedes, and you're very existential in many ways, and you love that car a great deal, and I don't want to damage our relationship, I'm going to act very fast with great intensity. And Birgit may decide that that behavior is inappropriate. You understand? And so, because she doesn't know my investment in that. And this is how those things happen at times. Any questions about that area? Is there anybody here that owns a camera that's worth over $200 type camera? If you know about your cameras, the lenses, like I said, are laminated in the cameras. And in Florida, there's fungus that somehow live on the glue that cements the lenses together. It starts growing in there. And if you leave your camera near salt sea spray, You know what I'm talking about? If you take your lenses off and you leave your camera on a wall near salt spray, or you put it down and you're conversing with somebody's very finicky about cameras and knows the effect of salt air just blowing through your camera. Even if you put the lens on it, you got a lot of shit. Because when you got a camera, a good camera, you got moist air on the inside, and the morning is cold, the moist air condenses on the lenses on the inside. And if you know about those things, you say to Virgil, goddamn, or you say to John, or you say to Rosalie, or Carl, why did you leave my goddamn camera on the wall? John says, I didn't do a fucking thing. You're paranoid over your camera. It depends on how much information you have about your camera and how much you depend on it. So it's extremely difficult. You think that the intensity of an eye surgeon is overly intense? Do you think the concern is intense beyond necessity? I mean, I don't think any human can perform if they could arrange the intensity exactly in line with what is required. Humans are not capable of that. Now, it's possible in an airplane to set your airplane at a given angle and push your throttle to a given point to climb at that angle. But if you're going to climb at this angle, I think you know where to push your throttle, what RPM, to get up at that angle. So this is high degree of appropriateness, mechanical. But the human body doesn't have any such thing. I, for example, don't know how much force I must use to open a door. I'll prove to you that most people don't know. The first two pushes, the door doesn't open. When people try to open a shut door with somebody screaming in the room, the first pushes don't work. It's the last push that works, because they increase the intensity. You understand what I mean? In pushing a door open. Now, there are very few people, except SWAT people, that come with a third intensity force right away on the door. They come, boom, right like that, and they open the door. The police have learned that. The police don't fiddle with the door and push, and by the time they've been shot 25 times. So they see a door, they get behind the wall, they master their force, and get far from the hinges. If the hinges are here, they kick the point furthest from the hinges of the door, boom, like that, see? And they push the door open and pull their guns in a probable area behind the door, see? And all of that comes from practice. So most of us have a system of reactions that are above the required appropriateness. Is there anyone who doesn't understand that? When I turn pages in a book, I turn pages because they're moving. Sometimes the pages don't move, so I change my stroke to get the pages to turn. You ever do that? And if you do that on a certain type of book, it ruins the book. So you have to learn degrees of appropriateness. Have any of you ever jumped off a wall of 2 or 3 foot height and not maintained the appropriateness, elasticity in your legs to allow for it to drop? You hear those clicks? That's because I don't do that frequently. And sometimes we come off too hard and we hurt ourselves. If you reach for something, if you reach for a doorknob, Carl, if the door weighs 3 tons, and you pull that doorknob believing that it's a 2-pound door, you will strain your muscles because you don't have enough muscles involved. You have 4 fine muscles involved, and they pull and they stretch. When you look at the door and you know it's 9 tons, the adrenaline, the amount of muscles involved increase automatically. Now, I'll tell you something. If you gave Dave a 40-pound ball, put him on a 2-foot wall, when you jump off a 2-foot wall without a 40-pound aluminum ball, there's a certain appropriateness. But with the 40 pounds, there's a different amount of tension when you feel the 40 pounds. That is physiological compensation, which can only come about through experience. All right. Now, what I'm saying then is, in all our decision-making, in all our behavior, we develop an associative reflex. In drafting, I've used a certain pencil to get a certain black line. If I buy a new lead that's 5 times as hard as the lead I've used, the same pressure will tear the paper, the drafting paper. So I can't, it doesn't say on the pencil, 1/4 the pressure gives you the same line that D4 gives you. There's not that much information. And sometimes I'll shade something and it doesn't fill in, it gets spotted all over the place. And it says, aha, the paper that you're working on looks like this under a microscope. When you run your pencil this way, it chips off particles of carbon that fall in the groove that make up a black line. A black line is not consistent. A black line is made of deposits of carbon in grooves in the paper. But if you buy a new drafting paper that has harder particles in it, you're going to get a line with lesser consistency. You're going to see it spotted rather than direct and hard by changing the paper. There are no sets that I've ever purchased in the non-technical world that give you the appropriateness for use. Like when you first buy an airbrush, you press a button and it gives you a stream of paint. But in the early days, you press the button and you get a gob of paint. You don't learn how to finger the right pressure, like your glass tube. Your churning is mechanical, as you indicated yesterday. It's done in stages. That's called, in aviation, it's called a four-stage barrel roll. You fly, you go like that, you fly, and you go like that. You ever see a mechanical barrel roll? And then there's a smooth barrel roll. In the glass blowing industry, they tell you that a lathe will give you that, or some automatic turning device. You have to have information before you can act appropriately. And I have great limiting factors in my own behavior. I know a lot about drawing. I know a lot of bits, and I give people a lot of bits, but I don't give them the fillers, see? And when they make a drawing, I yell at John for making this ellipse too pointed, see? And I say, I told you 25 times, see? And because I too pointed, what does that mean to John? Does it mean this? Does it mean that? What is too pointed to fresco? He doesn't know that. But if I said this to John, now whenever you want to draw an ellipse, do this, take half this distance, draw a circle out there, and tear into that circle, then he has an idea of what I mean by too pointed. But if he forgets that and draws a smaller ellipse, I feel that I've invested verbal behavior, and he used an ellipse that was too small, and I resent. I've told him something, and I used energy to tell him that, and he comes up with this. And I must have made an assumption while I was telling him that what I said was perfectly clear to me, and I assumed it was perfectly clear to John. And my anger is intolerance. The inability to understand that other people assemble words differently than I do. And sometimes it's hard for me to learn that. That's why perhaps sometimes I am intolerant of your drawings, and I do yell at you, or I do re-instruct you. And in so doing, I might learn to modify my behavior if I can allow for those differences. Now, the reason why most of us don't do that, let's say we've read all the books on conditioning and stress and what makes us angry. We've read all those books, and yet there are times when we fall short of that. Here's the reason for that. In becoming proficient at something, you've mastered a lot of little processes which are cumulative. And in becoming efficient, you make a certain amount of moves that are the minimum amount of moves you can make to accomplish a given end. And in instruction, you have to go far in excess. You can't, in instruction, you can't minimize the moves that effectively. You can mechanically. I can saw this. If it doesn't cut, I use a finer blade. You know what I mean? I can make a change. But in instruction, I can't. I can say to one kid, I can give one kid certain kinds of information, and that kid can make the appropriate move right away because that kid is already prepared to make that appropriate move. So what happens in instruction is we develop a system that may run like this, and we can get a lot done during the day. Now, the trouble with me is if I go into a shop and look at a piece of wood and I want to cut it, I know it takes me about a minute and a half to cut and I get it done. Now, if I want to drill 9 holes in a piece of wood, at the same place, I will stack 9 pieces of wood together, and I'll build a jig to hold them precisely, and I'll get those 9 holes drilled. But when I work with people, and I say, Dave, the reason you got those little scars on your face is because you touch that area that's wet and running all the time when you lean forward. See? And Dave says, you know, that's true, goddammit. And 3 minutes later, he leans forward and goes like that, because he has no mechanism that's going to turn that off. And so I can't conserve my day of expenditure of energy. My day is to do these 27 things. And in my day, I set times aside, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 9 minutes. I have a rough idea. When I work with people, there's something I want to do, and I make a move, and I feel that I've done that. But then when the people go ahead and do something, and it doesn't come out like that, it's far short of that, all of this efficiency has to be subtracted away from other things I might want to do. And so I resent the fact that I have to tell him, this isn't true, 25 times how to draw a head because I feel I've become proficient. But I haven't become proficient in giving that person the information to translate what I say immediately. All right. Now here is what I must do. I'm talking about my own insufficiencies. Since I've been criticizing so many people, I have plenty of insufficiencies. Here's what I have to do. I really have to go back to the ABC of perspective. Have them on that, and go through a lot of little details and lead them up to that. That might take a year and a half of instruction. Whereas, if I give them something far in advance of that, I can't get away from it. I've got to come back and re-instruct them if it's too advanced, and I can't get away from that. But if they do this all the time at sessions, they say, shit, all I'm drawing is boxes and I have nothing to show. I have no pictures. I have no end results. And the guy says, sure, I can draw a goddamn ball floating above a cone. So what? What the hell does it mean? I can even cut that ball in half, but I want to draw people. I don't want to draw balls and cones and all the... I don't want to learn the alphabet. I want to learn how to spell, is what people are saying. I don't want to know that this letter A can also be expressed in different ways. I just want to know one way to do it. And the whole story is, most people have an end goal or a proficiency that they seek. And most people cannot accept, including the instructor, the amount of effort one must put out to develop proficiency. Is there anybody that doesn't understand what I'm saying? It's significant if you think about it. Apparently, I don't know what proficiency another person seeks. Yes?
Aren't there some people that would accept their decision as to how much effort is required is appropriate to the situation?
Yes. In a school situation, you know that it's a 9-year course or a 5-year course, and you're going to cover the ABC of the first phase, Psychology 1. You get up and you do Psychology 1, and you go on from there. But if you don't have that as an end goal, if you try to move people as fast as you are able to deliver information, but they're able to absorb information at a lesser rate, then you have to work not at that level, somewhere in here. And if that seems to be the most efficient level for a given group, it may not work in another group. If I'm transferred from another community and I deliver information as I have at Harvard, it's not going to work. You understand? So you have to have a book, a scale, how to reach David, how to reach Marty, how to reach Sam, all these different ways, but you have to have a background chart. That's why a school or an employer wants a background on you. You worked for a travel agency for 9 years, you worked on airlines, you worked on tour arrangements, and the more they know about you, the more the boss can go in the office and read Time magazine and know that you can carry that job out. The boss doesn't like to have to come in all the time and tell you to change this and change that and change the other thing. They want proficient people, and they don't want to bother. And so what happens in this thinking system? Most of us have time that we set aside for our own way of expression, and we have to submit to lower levels. Do you talk to children much?
Yes.
All right. How long do you spend with children? If the children are interested.
Fairly long time. It depends on their age.
It depends on their intellect, too, how much they've developed. Do you ever become intolerant of children
Sometimes.
in instruction?
Yeah.
Okay. Because your estimation of their learning is incorrect. That must be the reason. But to accept that means that you don't want to devote that much time. Sometimes people come to sessions and they ask a question like, human nature won't permit that. And I have to ask myself whether I want to spend all day discussing that with them. Or just skip that. Just shunt it, you see? And that would be intolerant of me, in relation to that person, and then to be contempt for some of you, for me to stay with that person. That's that simple. You weren't here when the sweet old ladies arrived, were you? Were you here when the sweet old ladies arrived a couple of weeks ago?
No, but I've seen the same situation before.
Oh, but the sweet old ladies were the most fantastic. They came with the 1904 hats with the cherries on it. No, were you here? Were you? They were a caricature of what I talk about, with no exaggeration. And there they were. And this one has seen the green people and the flying saucers and all kinds of shit. And I spent a lot of time with them, you know. And it all amounted to a shit. It was only interesting as a study of that. Were you here?
No.
But it was an interesting session to me. And I'm just saying that some of these things that I try to talk about here are not linear. I can't talk about them as a system. I can only vary them in relation to questions. If I start out to talk about higher orders of abstraction, and somebody here is on level 2, I might shunt that system, go down to something else. And some people here might resent that, which I'm sure some of you do. Okay. Let's talk about levels of abstraction, levels of understanding. And I'll talk about, we'll try to evaluate aspects of behavior. Here am I walking with 3 children through the park, see? And I've taken them to the zoo on Crandon. And this kid says, I want some popcorn. And I get him some popcorn. And I said, you want a popcorn? No, I want a lollipop. I get a lollipop. And this kid says, well, give me 2 lollipops. I want a Coca-Cola. This kid. And then I say this. Now, what the fuck am I in this? What am I doing here? I mean, instead of taking the kid, well, I want to see the lion, I want to see the duck, I want to see that, what are you doing this shit for? So I'll put all the kids in the car, and I'll drive them home, instead of take that on. But if I can find that I want to take that on, I will. But there are times when I won't take it on. Now, if you say, you take it on or else, then I'll take it on, if it's an or else situation. But I would consider that subjecting myself to abuse, but Paul's undying love of children of all kinds, I will call Paul to take that on if he gets that much of a kick. In other words, someday he may be a very excellent man in terms of information, but can't present it. And you may have less information, but can present it better. And our job in the future is to try to get the optimal use of people in terms of what they can do. But a lot of us feel ashamed of things we can't do. Sometimes, this isn't true, but sometimes Roxanne will cut a crooked line instead of being smooth like that in cutting something into some styrofoam. It comes out like that. It doesn't represent that at all. And what happens is her hand movements aren't trained to a certain action pattern. And that may generate intolerance and anxiety. It goes into the shop, and again, these things aren't true, and I draw a circle on plywood and say, lead the bandsaw into that circle, and then cut it out. And being it does that, it goes into the circle, out of the circle, into the circle, out of the circle. And I say, God damn it, use more care. Well, that is no information. That is intolerance on my part. Use more care is what? I say, work slower. That may be a little better. So she does this on the circle now. She cuts occasionally out and in, okay? And then later on, if I say, God damn it, the circle is here and the blade is here. Keep your eye on the goddamn circle when you're cutting, see? That is not good enough. And if she fails there, I do this. I'll drive a nail into the middle of the piece of masonry, or bolt it to the table, and just say, turn it around the nail, and the saw blade will cut out the true circle. See? Now, I have mechanized that, and I've rid myself of the problem, but I haven't helped her in the skill. You know what I mean? The skill of following a line. I probably should not have given her the circle. This is what I could have done. I should have given her a piece of masonite with a white line drawn on it and say, as best you can, lead that through the saw and try to stay on the line. And when she did this, well, that's pretty good. Then I'll give her a line, a diagonal to cut across the masonite. Then I draw this on the masonite, a little bit like that. So she develops cutting. She says, I'm wasting a lot of masonite. She'd be wasting more masonite trying to cut a circle because that's too advanced. So what you do, if you can afford to, is buy a lot of masonite, a lot of plastic, and let people cut out a lot of predetermined forms that may ultimately lead to this skill. Is there anybody that doesn't understand that? Okay. There are some architects that have found by certain paper, like a pebble texture, by running a certain pencil across that at an angle, it deposits the lead in such a way that it looks like a tree without you drawing all that. It's got a pebble texture. So if you rub your pencil on that, it makes a tree for you. Instead of me putting all that shit in, paper does the work for you. And so years ago, I found myself drawing a lot of trees and putting in a lot of shit, and I didn't like that. I was intolerant of my own abilities. So I went home and I took a sponge, and I dipped it in ink pad, and I hid it on paper to see if I can get the accidental deposit of a lot of shit without the work. Then I cut a sponge in a random pattern and pressed it and tried to make trees on a top view fast. The sponge didn't work, and I went in the kitchen, I took some steel wool and dipped it in an ink pad. That didn't work. Then I took a piece of rug and I dipped it in an ink pad. And what I should have done was gone out to some millinery store and picked up a whole collection of patterns and tried to get that effect. You see? But being a dumb artist in the early days, I would just continually put in all the goddamn lines without ever trying to systematize it. Now, if you go into a process of trying to eliminate work, I don't know whether you know this, they sell on plastic a top view of trees, and architects buy black palm trees which they transfer onto their drawing. They're transferred. They run a pressure plate over it and try to transfer this tree right onto the drawing so they won't have to draw it anymore. They do sell ink pads for architects where you can stamp trees. Did you ever see those? It's an ink pad, you can stamp people standing in front of your building. Okay? Now, if you could sell an architect an ink pad to a 3-room home on a roller, where he rolls it across, you've got a 3-room home with the trees and all. And if he had an ink pad where you can stamp in a certain type of bathroom plan, see what I mean, like that? What you're doing when you think, so to speak, you're really phasing yourself out. The more you think about anything you do, you phase yourself out. If you think of better instruction, all that it means to you is tightening the information. When you get a slide projector, you don't work as hard. When you get a slide projector and models in their own, 3-dimensional models in a physics class, you are ultimately phasing yourself out. And that is why at these sessions I say that American industry will phase itself out by the sheer process of improvement. Now, if an industry, John says, well, what if the industry does improve? What if they go on and don't change those things? They don't always have to do what you say. Well, this has happened in England. They didn't change their industry enough, and they can't compete with the people that have. So if man's behavior ultimately will be free of tension-producing systems and resistance, it can only be based on the fact that they don't communicate with each other too much. And I think instructional machines that are appearing in universities acting as an interface between the student and the information. The machine is completely tolerant, and if he states the wrong answer, it'll revert back and simplify the question. That's great. That's great. Now, how do you do that, or can that be obtained in human relations? Let's assume that we've worked out the technology of the system. But in human relations, how are you going to work this? If Alex is hungry and go for steak dinner, and he likes to eat with people, and I'm not hungry at that time. If my wife wants to go to bed that night, I don't want to get laid that time. She doesn't want to get laid that time, and I want to get laid. How do you ease those differences? How do you ease the differences of sheer energy differences on the part of people? In any possible answers to that? In other words, suppose Carl likes to go horseback riding for 8 hours, and my ass is sore in an hour and a half, and I break his day, or he breaks my day. How do you deal with the differences of internal sheer expenditure of energy, internal desires that are different? How do you resolve that? Anybody want to volunteer any bits?
I think that you have to allow for a difference.
Allow for a difference. Does allowing for a difference mean that you have to subvert your desire?
I don't think anyone has if you allow for the difference. If you have, nor do I.
Well, if I'm a 10-mile rider and you're a 1-mile rider with a sore ass, how do you allow for the difference?
Well, I ride with you a mile,
Yes.
and then I go back. And
This is, I told we were going riding today. No. See, you're going to hurt other people. You're going to disappoint other people by sheer levels of difference of performance. If everybody doesn't understand that?
I don't
Now, if
really
you
think
do what
that
you say, you're
I
taking
don't-
care of yourself.
Yeah, I don't really think that you can disappoint them. I think that they disappoint themselves in the sense of that
But they don't know
they're
that.
dealing with their expectation level of your performance.
This is true, Carl. But they don't sit back and say, that's true. They get
Oh,
angry.
yeah, sure.
I'm sure your girlfriend wouldn't say, we have a difference of interest, and I can therefore understand that and not bother you. It doesn't work like that.
Well, if the differences then are too great, then the relationship won't last. And
All right.
if the differences are acceptable, it will last.
That's logical. Now, here's the
Right,
danger.
Look at,
Look, Paul, let me just say this. Paul, you like Marion. Here she is, see? You like Marion. And you've done the best performance to relate well with Marion. And Marion says, why don't you get lost? He says, I really don't want to see you. Now, wait. You're not prepared, are you, to sit back and say that when you're rejected, you're not ready for rejection at that time.
Oh, I would be prepared enough if somebody would tell me that to go out the next day and look for someone else.
Yeah. But is it a highly acceptable thing? Was it a
Yeah, it
painful
would
thing?
be acceptable to me.
Is there any pain in it?
I can accept that people reject me over my
All
body.
right, now let's try it another way. Let's assume that the first portion is true, but Jennifer here is the girl that enabled you to use your camera well, taught you many things, and has a whole lot of astronomy to teach you, biochemistry that you're interested in, and she says, get lost. Then it isn't so easy to say she doesn't. There's extension
I have never
of.
met somebody like that.
Okay. People sometimes are not logical about being rejected by being cut out from extensionality.
Sure.
It isn't that simple. Of a logical person doesn't want me, and that's all there is to it. It isn't that
But it's
simple.
not that you're logical about it. It is just that, if someone calls me a Nazi or whatever they would call me, or a dirty mechanism,
Well, that's easy to
and I
drop.
don't want to see you anymore.
You're
Then
not-
I know that
Yeah,
it's
that's
time
easy.
for me to keep on
But what if
walking.
the person is somebody you want to know, and somebody you want to
Well,
relate
I think
with?
I could accept that as well, as on the
But could you accept it without feeling downgraded?
Yeah, I think I can.
Is there anybody else that can do that? Accept rejection without feeling downgraded? Suppose a director has a different set of values about a character that you're doing, that you honestly don't agree with. Will you go his way or your way?
well, again, if he's got, if
Have
you're
you ever
being-
run into that?
Oh, it happens all the time. You only go his way if the money situation demands
It's in
it.
his head.
That's right. I mean, you
Okay.
say I have nothing to do. If the man tells me to do it this way, I don't argue. You want it that way? He's got the money. You got it. You either do it or get out.
In the sense of, because this is similar to what you are saying right now, is that you may meet a person in your life, and that happened to me, is that I found them very stimulating in certain areas, but they had absolutely no use for me at the level I was at. So I just had to accept it and say, well, this person has no
Well,
use
I
for
agree
my
with you.
behavior.
Do you do that emotionally too, or do you feel a little
I
low?
don't feel it yet.
You don't?
No, I don't.
Is there anybody else that's achieved that? Will you raise your hand? In some area. What is so difficult about that? Why do we have so much difficulty?
Difficult. Well, the first question was the energy differential. Now, the second question's a little different.
Yeah, you mean a director, a person who's going to be very expensive to you, but he doesn't like men with beards.
Oh, no, but
Well, you don't want to go to bed with him. He's a homosexual. You know what I mean? That extensionality is important to you. Now, if you
Oh,
go to
yeah.
bed with him, if you go to bed with this producer, and you get launched, and Van says he sold his ass for a part in the picture. Now, if he peddles his ass for a part in the picture, he goes to bed with this guy once, and now he's launched. This way, he walks down the street with torn shoes to every agent, you know, and this and that, I can do this, the guy will let you know. He goes to bed with one guy. Is that degrading behavior? Is that degrading? How are you going to look at that? We look at it as degrading behavior. A person that has very few principles. Or a person has a lot of principles. Yes.
What's that? How I would
The
look at it?
morality of the situation. Suppose you met a guy who was right up there and could help you a great deal and you wanted to go to bed with him. Would you?
I don't know.
Would
if
you
I could-
submit?
I don't know if I could handle a thing like that. I mean, that's more than just
You
a
might.
mental thing.
You might.
Well, that's more than just a mental thing. I don't think I could, I just couldn't handle it psychologically.
You
I
might.
mean, even if I want to, I'd say, look, I'll sell myself out, just let me do something else.
But if
I
he
couldn't
said,
do it, I don't think.
if he said, I will launch you,
Yeah, I know.
he wants to blow you once.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, that's all right.
Okay.
Fine. That's a cinch. Even 3 times I can go that far. I mean, that's easy. I know we have to go the whole
Okay.
full ball game here. Oh, that's a cinch. Are you kidding? Want to meet that guy?
Do you honestly look at a girl the same way if she goes to bed with a director as being a cheap cunt, or do you look at her as a goddamn whore?
I try not to
tramp?
think about
What
it.
do you though?
I try not
Do
to
you,
think about
though?
it. I probably would. Look, I look at most people as whores and prostitutes anyway, so I figure most women who marry most guys are whores. So, actually, I have
Do you
a
look at
certain...
your mother that way?
I have a certain... Yeah. Yeah, in a certain sense I do. Yeah.
All right.
In a certain sense, yes.
Okay.
In a certain sense, yes.
This is what-
So if I see a calculating professional woman who has to do a certain thing, I actually sort of have more respect for her. Because she at least knows she's selling her ass out. Most women are hypocrites and say they're not. You know?
Yeah.
Look, I met this gal Jessica Walden, although she didn't do it. I know her years ago. She said, look, Alex, look at this body. She was getting dressed at the time. I just happened to be passing by at her apartment. She was getting dressed. She said, look at this. This is what I got. I'm going to keep it in great shape, and I'm going to get there any way I can. She was just overdoing it, but I sort of had a lot of respect. I said, gee, you're right. It looks pretty good. I mean, that was it. I have respect for people like that. I don't respect hypocrites.
Okay. How do you feel about a girl that does that? You have any attitude?
Yeah, I still have negative Q value.
Now let me ask you, if you found out that you believe that we could have a great deal of exchange of goods and resources in the world and less war, if you let this guy fuck you up the ass 5 times, would you?
No, I don't, well,
Once.
I don't know, John.
Now, how do you look at world peace then? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to deal with. Do you know that probably a lot of great international decisions were based upon situations like that?
If so,
It's unfortunate.
if I was in a situation like that and I refused it, then I would say that I'm damaged.
I see.
Because
Okay.
this is the thing, is that I don't know the significance of the act, and it's a very selfish thing for me to say no because it's harming me without thinking of the overall consequences.
Good. Would you? Getting a male point of view, would you do that?
Do what?
If you can get your established thing in Australia, long teaching program with $40,000 a year by letting a guy blow you twice, once, feel your ass. And then you got the rest of your life a high income and no more bother. You don't think you do it. You might do it. Paul?
I would not hesitate to say.
Now, here, when you take men into the situation, it's a very different point of view. Would you, Rosalie? For your Shangri-La? You don't know. Would you?
What do you mean about what
For your
you're doing?
Shangri-La, whatever that is to you.
What are the circumstances now? Are
Think
you
about-
talking about a guy? What are
You've
you
got an
talking about?
income of $75,000 a year.
Yeah.
If you go to bed with this guy for 3 days, for the rest of your life, you don't see him anymore. You have to think of all the lousy lays you got and never got paid for. You think, the point is that it's a very touchy
For the rest
subject.
of my life?
Rest of your life. You
Um,
might.
no.
Would you? Rosalie? Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Now, if you walked over, just say that, and you said to Rosalie, here's $10, Rosalie, I want to go to bed. Here's a guaranteed income for life, I want to go to bed. She's not shocked. The difference between a person that's shocked and insulted is what you offered them to go to bed. You offer $1.50 as an insult. But the kingdom of Israel, that's what the hell you want. It's different. So the decision-making systems we are all moralists, and our moralistic judgments interfere. They interfere. And the point is, if we feel that a person will peddle their ass for a given amount of money, would they let you down for a given amount of money? Would they subvert something that you require loyalty to? You see what I mean? And we get mixed up in that area. If Carl meets a guy and says, I'll give you all the money you want, but we burn out socio-saccharine, and I fuck you up the ass once and you get 100,000 a year, will he do that? Will you do that?
But I will say that, it depends in a lot of areas. I just feel like the way you said in the lecture before, I feel that everybody in this system is a prostitute. And I see very little difference between a girl going to an office and spending for her boss 8 hours there, and then making it with a guy that say $400. I see no difference.
If you met a prostitute,
a prostitute is much smarter.
Would you live with a
She can
prostitute?
do the job with less abuse.
Would you live with a prostitute if you knew she was intellectually your...
I certainly would. If she would be intellectually live up to, but it would, in terms of the law, I would maybe hesitate because I could get into problems with the law.
Oh, and she's no longer a prostitute, gave it up. You've been a prostitute for 30 years,
Yeah.
but she's smart, attractive.
Doesn't bother me at all.
Would you? You'd live with a prostitute, would you? She's quit the profession. We've worked for 40 years. Yeah.
It sounds like a nice idea. I don't
Would
know
you?
if I would
She's
do it.
smart, attractive,
She's smart,
intelligent.
attractive. Well, if she was Greta Garbo would quit, yes. It's always that kind
Would
of...
you?
I have.
Okay.
You have?
Let me tell you something. I felt always that girls that are more outgoing about going with guys to bed during the time when I was younger. I met a lot of girls that had a lot of experience with a lot of guys. I found that much more admirable, a girl being sexually open with a guy, than somebody playing the role of saying, don't touch me, I'm a good girl, or, playing this type of role, the opposite type of role. And I find that I'm much more comfortable with people that are sexually open and state what they want than with people that are, playing a role.
Would you live with a guy that peddled his ass for years, was a nice guy, had a lot in common with him, if he was pleasant, honest with you? Would you? Would you? Good. No. So here you see an across area of values. At the present time, we're reflective of the new values and some of the older values, always in one. Is there anything in this particular area you want to discuss? We're not talking about right or wrong. We're talking about behavior. We're not talking about what you want to do or what not to do. We're just talking about what people might do. Okay? Shall we go for coffee?